Is This a Great Game or What? With Tim and Jeff Kurkjian, my Hall of Fame dad. Hey, Dad, you're in spring training right now. But before we get to the spring training stories, because I know you have a ton of them, we have to celebrate because you were elected and inducted into the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame, which is so cool. And Dad, now you are in the same Hall of Fame as our guest today, who is Keith Hernandez.
Well, that's absolutely preposterous that I'm in the same Hall of Fame on any level with the greatest defensive first baseman of all time. But I have really been surprised, Jeff, I must say, by the feedback I've gotten. This is taped, but I saw the Cardinals the other day, and Brian Bartow, who's the PR director for the Cardinals, I walked into his office at 7:15 in the morning, and he said, "Congratulations on the Hall of Fame," which, of course, the big Hall of Fame I went into was 2.5 years ago. And he meant the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame. So I was absolutely honored. He said, "I'm a big Strat guy. That's all my brother and I did growing up." So this is a big deal. I am honored beyond words to be going in, but to be going in with Keith Hernandez or in the same club as him just doesn't feel right, even though it's great.
Well, and Keith Hernandez is going to be a great guest. We're going to check in with him. He's a Mets broadcaster, obviously a former great Major League Baseball player, along with he played for the Cardinals, played for the Mets. So he's going to be joining us to talk Strat-O-Matic and more coming up shortly.
And Jeff, I was absolutely astonished that I was inducted in the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame. So many people, so many friends of mine have played this game, but I'm absolutely thrilled and surprised, almost as surprised as I was when I was inducted into the Armenian Sports Hall of Fame a few years ago. Did not see that one coming. And I got inducted in the group that went in. I got inducted in between Garo Yepremian, the little kicker who used to kick for the Miami Dolphins, and Ara Parsegian, who's one of the greatest college football coaches ever. I mean, what a beautiful juxtaposition. Yepremian, Tim Kurkjian, Ara Parsegian. It was such an amazing event when I went in. I did ask, I asked before as I was traveling out there, would you like me to make any sort of speech? Do I have to make a speech? They said, "We'd love for you to make a speech, but we need you to keep it to 30 seconds or less." 30 seconds. So I made a 30-second speech and I was out of there. It was great.
That is amazing. Well, we did send a little Hall of Fame acceptance. You weren't able to make it up to the Strat-O-Matic induction ceremony because of spring training, but if you want to see that video, you can actually go to Strat-O-Matic.com and watch Dad's videos or see them on social media as well. So, Dad, we're going to get to Keith Hernandez. We're going to do more on Strat, of course, and I have a special surprise for you from Strat-O-Matic, but in the time being, I want to hear about spring training. You were in Arizona. Now, currently, when we're recording this, you're in Florida. Tell us all about what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, this is my 45th spring training, Jeff. And fortunately, I did not run into Ken Griffey Jr. this spring, because you remember what happened when I saw him last spring for the first time. He looked at me and he said, "People retire. You know that, right?" That was his way of telling me maybe it's time for me. So no one told me that I should retire. But again, I had a great time. Spring training is always the best place to be. And of course, one of my stops is gratuitous, but I had to go see the Dodgers, Jeff, because there's nothing like the roster that the Dodgers have put together here with 3 Japanese starting pitchers. And it was a complete circus in Glendale, Arizona. Last year, we used to joke that on a scale of 1 to 10, the level of interest in the Dodgers was an 11. This time, we believe now it's a 12, because with 3 Japanese pitchers and with all the other, they're the defending world champions, and Shohei Ohtani's going to come back and pitch. It was just crazy. But let's be clear, Jeff, the Dodgers really know how to run a team and run an organization. Even though everyone thinks they're just buying something, they're a lot more than that. Trust me. But I also had it was a really cool moment, Jeff. Dustin May is coming back, trying to pitch for the Dodgers. He's been out close to 2 years with arm injuries and everything else. And I was there the day he pitched his first inning of an exhibition game in close to 2 years. And he had a little trouble in the first, but he got out without allowing a run, and he ran off the mound, put his face in his glove, and screamed, victoriously, like he got through this. He worked so hard to get back to this. It was just another reminder, you're a young guy, you're trying to make your way in the big leagues. You've been hurt for a couple years. That was a really good scene and a really fun scene in spring training.
Yeah, and rightfully so, getting emotional. I saw those photos, Stat, of him walking off the mound, and I couldn't imagine, after all the difficulty he's been through, even in a spring training game, to feel that you're back is a great feeling.
Right. It was really great. I also saw the Angels, and Mike Trout is moving from center field to right field, which is now clear. They're doing this in part to try to keep him healthier so he can, not get hurt as often. I'm not sure how much healthier he's going to stay in right field and center field, certainly less running. But it's interesting. One of their guys told me that, Trout last few years has gotten hurt, like 4 years in a row now. And they're hoping by having to learn a whole new position, and right field is a whole different position than center field, trust me on that he's going to be so in tune to learning everything he has to do to play right field that it might actually keep him healthier. Instead of him playing center and saying to himself, please don't get hurt, please don't get hurt, maybe because he's focusing on the defense in right field, that it might keep him healthier. We'll see if that works in that respect, because let's hope so, because the game's always better when Mike Trout plays. And finally, I saw Pete Alonso of the Mets. He's the one that had a very difficult offseason trying to get his contract finally done. It finally was 2-year deal, much shorter than most people thought. He's getting paid for 2 years, believe me. And he always wanted to go back to the Mets, and the Mets always wanted him back. It just took an awful long time. So I had a nice chat with him the other day, and he said, it was just lovely, lovely, the offseason he talked about. I think he was being a little bit sarcastic, but he did, Jeff. He went to Ireland, he went to Iceland, he went to Rome, and he went to Paris. So that's a pretty good offseason, don't you think? I mean, I went to West Virginia. That's where he went. He went. So during this very difficult offseason trying to get a deal, he and his wife went all over the world. And I think that's really, really great that a baseball player can get out, experience some other cultures and everything else. So Pete Alonso was a happy guy because, finally got his contract done, back with the Mets, and now he's seen 4 countries that 3 of them he'd never been to before.
It's pretty neat, too. Maybe that's why it was taking so long to get the deal. We can't nail him down. He's in Italy. He's checking out Michelangelo, Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, very good. Now let's talk about Strat-O-Matic, Jeff, since I'm the newest member of the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame. I've told you some of these stories before, Jeff, but so many people that I know in the business, Bob Costas and all sorts of stars in the business, they played Strat-O-Matic growing up. And I told you that John Miller, Hall of Fame broadcaster, who was the Orioles play-by-play guy when I was the beat guy, this is in the 80s, and I left my notebook at the Metrodome one night, and John Miller picked it up for me and brought it up to his room. So he said, come on up, come get your notebook. So I went up to his room after the game, like midnight, and he's in his room playing Strat-O-Matic, having called a major league game that night. And he had the Blue Jays, and he goes, I love the Blue Jays bullpen. And he had Dwayne Ward and Tom Henke all lined up to pitch the 8th and the 9th inning. So I just love that. And John also told me the story once on a team flight, similar time period. He played Strat-O-Matic on the airplane with Cal Ripken Jr., who had never played the game before. And John,
I can already guess he got hyper competitive in his very first time playing.
Right. So John beat Cal Jr., who's like one of the great baseball savant of all time. He never misses a trick. He always wins no matter what the competition is. So he was the manager against John Miller, the manager, and John Miller won. And the next time they went on the flight, Ripken said, I want a rematch. So they had to play again so Ripken could win, because Ripken can't do anything unless he wins. That was just priceless, that a player was introduced to Strat-O-Matic on a charter flight, lost, and then came back and won because he was so intrigued by how the game worked. So, and we'll get to Keith Hernandez in a minute, but I've told you my story, Jeff, that I started playing. I played APBA, at least that's what I call it, when I was a little kid. Then I went to Strat-O-Matic when I was about 14 or so, and I played it religiously all the way through high school. And I told you, when all my friends, most of whom you know, were out, drinking beer and all that stuff on a Saturday night,
Kissing girls.
I was sitting in my house on Stoner Road playing Strat-O-Matic by myself, and I was like announcing the games underneath my breath, and sometimes I would write a game story after I played a game to try to get my writing skills better. And I kind of felt sorry for myself, that I looked up and a couple times and said, is this what you're supposed to be doing right now? Why, you should be out with your buddies or something. So in spring training in Arizona, Jeff Fletcher, who's the broadcaster not a broadcaster, who's a sports writer, covers the Angels. He saw me and he said, Tim, just want to let you know, I played Strat-O-Matic all by myself on Saturday nights when I was in high school also. So as it turns out, I'm not the only one.
Well, Strat-O-Matic has been a great partner with Is This a Great Game or What, Dad? And we kind of put together a surprise for you. So during our first season of the podcast in 2024, you gave us some spectacular best of all Tim teams. So what I had Strat-O-Matic do was put them into a tournament to see who is the best of all Tim teams. Now, keeping in mind that I left out any team that had anything to do with excellence. And I mean that respectfully, right? You did like your all Hall of Famer team, which is just basically the greatest players, right? Of course, they're going to crush the all romance team, because the all romance team is just a bunch of players that have love, or Bobby Valentine,
Right. My first game, Jeff, that I saw here in Florida, who was the first baseman for the Marlins? Jonah Bride from the all romance team. I got it.
Well, also who was in the all-weather team, Dad, including JT Snow, Kurt Flood, and Tim Raines. The all cities of the world, including Benito Santiago. You've got Don Florence, Alex Madrid, Kelly Paris. The all-cooking team with Dusty Baker, of course, playing in the outfield. Cliff Cook, the third baseman, which is great. Jason Grilly, which is one of my favorite ones. All romance team, as we referenced, Rick Sweet, Jonah Bride, Joe Sparks. All bodies of water, as in Fred Marsh, Steve Lake, Simon Pond. All Declaration of Independence team.
Hal Chase.
Right? Yes. Hal Chase.
Right.
Josh Harrison, Carlos Lee, Mookie Wilson. So those are all last names of authors of the Declaration of Independence.
Wait. Someone named Mookie signed the Declaration of Independence?
No, Wilson. Last name Wilson.
It was a joke, Jeff. I knew that.
That was a good one. All courtroom team, of course, led by Johnny Bench. And then you got Tom Lawless and Aaron Judge on that team.
Right.
The all smart team with Bobby Witt Jr., very relevant, Dad. Socrates Brito, John Smart, the all-singer team, Carlos Santana, Chris Brown, Chris Young, Deion Sanders, all of these great ones. And then last but certainly not least, the all-car team, including Ichiro Suzuki, John Dodge. The stretch is Austin Martin. And so anyway, the point is, those are 10 teams. They put them into a 162-game season and then ranked them 1 through 8. 9 and 10 didn't make the tournament. Number 1 seed went to Declaration of Independence. They beat the number 8 seed, the romance seed. Courtroom actually beat the Cities team. Cities was number 2, mind you.
Wow.
in a 4-1 and 5 games in a 7-game series. Bodies of Water over the All Singer team, and then the Car team, that's the 5 seed, took over number 4 Weather from 4-2. And then in the championship, so we fast forward now, All Car against All Declaration, the overall number 1 seed, All Declaration of Independence team, taking on the number 5 seed. And Dad, I want to run through some of these stats because I know they'll make you smile. These are notable stats, the full tournament 3 rounds. Hal Chase, 6 RBIs, 5 stolen bases, slashing .333.
And Jeff,
pretty
remember,
darn good.
Hal Chase was one of those rare position players like Ricky Henderson that batted right-handed and throws left-handed and played the equivalent of 10 major league seasons doing that. Only less than 10 players in the history of baseball have ever played the equivalent of 10 major league seasons as a position player, throwing left-handed and batting right-handed. Hal Chase was one of those. And he had a great sim. That's so cool.
Carlos Lee of the All Declaration Championship team, mind you, 4 home runs, 14 RBIs over the 3 rounds of the tournament. Will Smith, .333, 4 homers, 14 RBIs as well. Ichiro Suzuki, 3 rounds for the All Car team, bats .382, Dad, with 7 RBIs.
That is so great. In the year in which he's going into the Hall of Fame, he leads the all-car team into the most ridiculous final of all time. I love it. Jeff, it's going to be a real challenge in 2025 for me to come up with 35 more all something teams. I've already used up all my best ones in 2024. This is going to be a challenge. We may have to repeat a few in case somebody missed an episode from 2024.
Big shout out to our friends at Strat-O-Matic for running that simulation for us. We absolutely love that they did that. And congratulations to the All Declaration of Independence team.
That is so great. We'll do the All Eclipse team again, Jeff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you did that one on Twitter. Your favorite place on earth.
No, we're going to have to wait about another 60 years to do the All Eclipse team. So don't worry about that.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, Dad, I'm glad you enjoyed that little surprise. Now, you mentioned that you weren't running out of teams, but I know you have a team for today that has to do with our guest.
Right. Our guest is Keith Hernandez, who I believe is the greatest defensive first baseman of all time. So I'm going to give you my all greatest defensive team with one player at each position. Now, Jeff, what are the rules when I do something like this? You know the rules. What are the rules? This is my list.
This is your list. Okay. We want to make this very clear, right? And this is the beauty of baseball, right, Dad? You may be a baseball writer, a Hall of Fame baseball writer at that. You might have covered this game for 50 years. However, that's what's great about the game is it's in the beauty of the eye of the beholder, right? There is a debate at every position. So this is your list of the all defensive best of all Tim team. I'm excited to hear it.
Right. And if anyone has their own list, we'd sure like to see it because I repeat, this is my list. It's not the correct list. It's not the only list. Okay, Johnny Bench is the catcher. He's the greatest throwing arm I've ever seen. 1975, caught 1,002 innings with no pass balls. And he basically perfected the one-handed catching style. So Johnny Bench, one of our guests last year on the podcast, is our catcher. As I said, Keith Hernandez is at first. Jeff, he's before your time, obviously, but no one, and I mean no one, charged a bunt and threw across the diamond better than Keith Hernandez. This was back in the day, Jeff, where people actually bunted. He would charge the plate and end up like 15 feet from home plate, catch a ball and throw it over to third. Everything he did was majestic as a first baseman. Don Mattingly's the second best I've ever seen, but Keith Hernandez is the best I've ever seen. Second base, I've got Bill Mazeroski from a different time. Bill Mazeroski taught every second baseman of his time and years later how to make double play. He would stand on top of second base, Jeff, with those stocky, strong legs, and he would just catch and throw. The transfer that he made, nobody ever made it better than Bill Mazeroski. And I know Davey Johnson, who was a really good second baseman, told me he learned how to make the double play watching Bill Mazeroski play. So he's my second baseman. My third baseman, of course, is Brooks Robinson, who won 16 Gold Gloves. He used to get down on his knees occasionally and let balls hit him during batting practice in the chest so he could get used to the ball hitting him and keeping it in front of him. He had the softest hands and one of the softest bodies you'll ever see. Brooks Robinson, an amazing third baseman. Ozzie Smith is our shortstop. And Jeff, he might be the greatest defensive player at any position, because I believe shortstop is such a critical defensive position. Nobody ever played it better than he did. So he's my shortstop, and I'm not even sure there's a close second there. Left field, I've got Carl Yastrzemski, who was a multiple Gold Glove winner and played the left field wall at Fenway Park. Not an easy thing to do. Absolutely beautifully. Willie Mays is the center fielder. Remember, he won 12 Gold Gloves, Jeff. Nobody went back on a ball like Willie Mays. No one went side to side better. No one came in better. And he had a great throwing arm. And they didn't even start awarding Gold Gloves until several years into his career. Otherwise, he'd have won 14, maybe 16 of them. That's how great Willie Mays was. And Roberto Clemente is our right fielder. I believe he's the greatest defensive right fielder ever and the greatest throwing arm from any outfield position that I've ever seen. And of course, a baseball hero. We now celebrate Roberto Clemente Day, number 21. And our pitcher is Greg Maddux, who won 16 Gold Gloves. Jeff, as a pitcher, he never threw a ball straight. Like, he had such command of his pitches that he could make it move in any direction that he wanted. However, on the 1-6-3 double play, meaning he catches a grounder and has to feed the second baseman, in this case, the shortstop. Walt Weiss, one of his shortstops, told me that Greg Maddux threw a perfect four-seamer, as straight as you can possibly throw a baseball, to the shortstop in order to make the double play. Where every pitch he threw to home plate, he had some sort of natural movement to it. That's one of the many reasons why I've got Greg Maddux as the greatest fielding pitcher of all time.
Yeah, and I really think that's one of those guys we're going to have to get on the podcast this year as well. Be an amazing guest.
He is a magician, and he is a robot. He's one of the greatest pitchers ever.
And speaking of getting people on the podcast, your first baseman of the all-defensive team, your fellow member of the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame, Keith Hernandez, is going to join us for a great conversation coming up next.
Welcome back to Is This a Great Game or What? And our guest this week is Keith Hernandez, one of the greatest first basemen of all time. For me, the greatest defensive first baseman of all time. And, of course, broadcaster for the Mets on TV with Ron Darling and Gary Cohen. Keith, this is my son, Jeff. Say hello.
Hi there, Jeff. How are you?
Keith, I'm great. Thank you so much for joining our show. And I'm proud to say that I was the one who asked my dad to ask you to be on the show, because you two share a very intimate connection in both being members of the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Officially, Dad was inducted in February. How great!
Congratulations. And I was inducted more than about 5 years ago, I think. I've always helped out Strat-O-Matic. When I went on the air with SNY and doing Met games, I always mentioned Strat-O-Matic, so they got in touch with me. They're out in Long Island.
Right.
So I always give them ratings of Met players at the end of the season, 1 to 4, and running 1 to 8 or 1 to 17, arm strength, all that stuff that goes with Strat-O-Matic.
Keith, when did you get interested in Strat-O-Matic? When did you start playing? And did you play in a league, or did you play by yourself? How did that work as a young man?
Well, we used to always get, when we were kids, we couldn't wait to get the Street and Smith spring edition of every baseball season.
Of course.
And always in the back, there was this little ad in the back a black and white ad of a pitcher and his windup, which was their logo.
Right.
That always intrigued me. And it intrigued me when I was in Little League. And I never bought the game. And then I finally, when I was in high school, my junior year or I decided, my senior year actually, I decided to buy the game. It was the 1971 season. And I managed every team. So I dual managed in the games. I made my own schedule. But actually, I went back and was able to find the schedules of the teams as it was played in 71. But, you don't have what you have today where you have the actual lineups, the starting pitching, and all that, where you can recreate the entire season. And you don't have the computer to do the tabulation of the stats. So I kept a little notebook, like a school notebook, and I'd put the line, games, at-bats, runs, and I would keep score with Roman numerals or whatever you want to call those things. And when I got to 30 games, it'd be around 120 at-bats for the player, 110 depending. Then I would put them over and I would know month by month what they were hitting. I played that C71 season. I never played the American League. I grew up in San Francisco.
Right.
When the Oakland A's came, that got our attention. But when I was a kid growing up, it was just the Giants. So we were a National League town. So I only played the National League, and I played every game, and I was at 121 games. And I got drafted by the Cardinals. And I had to go to spring training. And I think you know this story.
Well, tell it.
I wanted to finish the season so bad. The blood burned to the place. That's when they had Lee May before the big trade with Houston. So Joe Morgan was with Houston, and Lee May, Tommy Helms, Dennis Menke were still with Cincinnati in that big trade for Morgan and Geronimo, and I was someone else that made Jack Billingham, I believe. And it was a big trade that made the Reds and started the Reds on their road to being the big red machine. So I packed my bag and I stuffed my game. This box on the very bottom of my suitcase. On the very bottom of my suitcase. And I flew to Tampa for spring training. The first time I never got on an airplane. And I flew across the country. And I got to my little flophouse motel off 4th Street in St. Petersburg. And I just couldn't wait. I got into my suitcase and I went through my clothes and there was no game. So I got on the phone. And back then, there was a pay phone. There was no cell phones, 1972. I called collecting my parents. I said, Dad, what'd you do to my game? He said, son, I knew you were going to try to break that game. You need to focus on baseball, not Strat-O-Matic. So I never finished that season.
Keith, that is hilarious. That just go back for a second though. So you would get 4 hits in a high school game, and when the game's over, you would go home and play the Cardinals against the Cubs for the 2 hours at night. Have I got that right?
I would play sometimes the whole league, 2-3 days of games. I mean, I'd be there for hours, and that's the day you roll the dice. Then I'm marking down at bat. Dennis Menke, okay, at bat. Then mark it at bat on my card because it didn't give you when the game was over. It didn't give you everything you needed to know like you have today. It's so easy today with the computer.
Sure,
your stats go as you go forward and you play today. It's great. They do the tabulations for you. So I put all that extra effort in. And back then they didn't have left-right splits, which really to me was a great transition of that game. That made the game more interesting because now you can really manage. If you had someone that hit 300, but only against left-handers. He just didn't have that back then. So he could hit 300 against a right-hander, and he was only hitting like 190 against them. So that, to me, was the big the big deal breaker right then. Not the deal breaker. That sold me, and that got me back into playing Strat-O-Matic after I retired.
Keith, I have to say, hearing you tell that story is so beautiful. We launched this podcast opening day last season, 2024, and I think my dad has told that story 4 times on the podcast, and it's even better hearing from you because here we are, right? My dad taught me how to play Strat-O-Matic. In fact, Keith, with no ability statistics-wise, I would make my own cards. So I made one named after my grandfather. But Keith, he would have been the greatest player ever. He would have been Shohei Ohtani times 2. In fact, I had the Hall of Fame deck, but the year before Cal Ripken Jr. was inducted, and I grew up in Maryland, so I loved Cal Ripken Jr., so I made him a card. And if Cal Ripken Jr.'s card was accurate, he would have hit 1,200 home runs in his career. But to your point, we are in love with this game, and we all had our own obsessions. When you got drafted, you took the game with you. I would make cards of people I loved, and it's just the only difference between my dad and I and you is you're one of the greatest major league players of all time, and we're just kind of nerds on our own, but we all have this beautiful thing in common, which I love.
Well, you know the comment from Lenny Dykstra when he hit the walk-off home run in the Houston 86 playoffs, when he hit the game-winning home run off of Dave Smith, and then it was a game 3 or 4. I'm not sure which one. No, would that either be 4 or 5? 3 or 5. I think it was 3 off Dave Smith. His quote in the paper was, I didn't know he played Strat-O-Matic. He goes, well, I've never hit a walk-off home run. I've rolled them in Strat-O-Matic. What I get a big kick out of.
That is so beautiful. So,
well, Dad,
Keith,
real quick, before we get off this, we have a little surprise for you, Keith. So we called up our friend Jerry Milani at Strat-O-Matic, who we love. He's great. We did strat simulations every week on our show last season. So what if Joe DiMaggio got traded for Ted Williams? You know, there was all that rumor around there. So we ran both their careers and saw what if Lou Brock didn't get all of these great strat sims. So we actually were able to pull up your card from 1979.
Well, that's a big card.
Oh, that's a great card.
That's a big card. Okay, I'm going to have my dad send this to you so you can see it afterwards. But I brought my dice out.
Okay.
Or do you have dice with you? Do you want to roll on your own card?
Hold on. 1986 Mets. 82 Cardinals. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to roll on your card. Who are we facing, a righty or a lefty here?
Well, I killed lefties that year, so get me up against a lefty.
Okay, we're going to put you up against a lefty.
He was tough.
All right, an honest 3 was rolled.
Right.
I was going to re-roll if I got a 4, 5, or 6. And that means we're on the batter card. Here we go. 3-10. Walk. We're going to take it.
I walked a lot.
Yeah, you walked. I think you walked 100 times that year, didn't you? 79.
I walked 100 times once in my career.
Right.
That was, I think, 80 or I think it was 80.
Right.
Walked 100 times in St. Louis.
Right. So Keith,
around 80 to 90 times. I got on base for the big boys.
Right. Keith had more walks than strikeouts in his career, which never happens anymore.
Well, I got over 1,000 walks. I got over 1,000 strikeouts, believe it or not, and I got over 1,000 RBIs. And if we hadn't had those strike years, like we were locked out. I went through 2 strikes and lost playing time, so kind of diminished the numbers that would have been much stronger, much better. But anyway.
So, Keith, have you played a Strat-O-Matic game with your own card? So you're playing with your own card. You're playing the Cardinals in 82 or the Mets in 86.
Yes, of course. I played the 86 season twice. We won the 82 season. I played 5 times. Why did I play it 5 times? I managed every team. Cardinals never won. won the division. Montreal was the best team.
Right.
Montreal had a great team. It was one of the great mysteries why they didn't win when they had Dawson and Carter and Steve Rogers and Woody Fryman. They were such a good team. The Pirates as well in Philly. But the Cardinals in '82, I go, gosh, and I kept on playing it over and over because it takes forever to play a full season if you're managing, the whole league. If you're playing, you got to play every game.
Right.
Which is great fun.
Genuine question, Keith. When I would play Strat-O-Matic and I would get upset at a player, right? I would say, oh, come on, Tony. Come on, Tony Gwynn, what are you doing? When you would maybe strike out in one of your own, do you say, come on, Keith? Or you say, come on, me? Or do you get upset at yourself when your card strikes out or doesn't get on base?
The only time I ever got pissed was I was in high school and we got the famous teams. So we got all the world championship teams, the 27 Yankees and again. And I took, what was it? What was the year that Cleveland lost to the New York Giants when they had Feller, Lemon?
Right. 48. Right.
And
no, 54. 54. Sorry. They won in 48. They lost in 54 to the Giants.
Yes. In 54, that Garcia, Feller, Lemon, and the other great pitcher.
Early win, yeah.
Early win. Bob Lemon was the only one that ever pissed me off. He walked a friggin' ballpark. Finally, I remember I was playing upstairs with Pete Santora's house, and Tony was downstairs. He was our manager, and Joe DiMaggio, the summer league, and Pete was my catcher. And we went to school together and played summer ball together and in high school. And finally, I got so frustrated, I threw his card up in the air. I used to always go, okay. He walked two batters. I would just, on his card, I'd walk back and I'd just like, get Mossy up. Don Mossy was their closer. I'd get Mossy up. I could not win with Bob Lemon, the Hall of Famer.
Jeff, Bob Lemon's a Hall of Famer. And Keith throwing his card up in the air.
He walked the ballpark.
Oh, my gosh. Keith, have you ever looked at one of your cards and said, what are we doing here? I'm a 1 through 12 runner here. I had 60 triples in my career, and you got me as a 1 through 12. Did you ever look at one of your cards and say, you got me wrong on this? I'm a better buncher than this. I'm a better base. I'm faster than this. Did that ever happen?
I think I was a 1 for 12. That's a 1 for 14 with 2 outs now.
Right.
It's hard to pull me out. I think 1 to 13 is a little. I think that's starting to get into the fast territory.
Right.
Okay,
Keith,
1 to 17, the Lou Brocks, the Willie McGee's, they were the 1 to 17s, and I was not a 1 to 15, and I wasn't a 1 to 14. You can make an argument. But once I got going, I mean, I could score on a single. We didn't have to worry. I can score from first on a double. I had a lot of triples because St. Louis, that big ballpark.
Right.
And once I got going, I could run.
Right. Speaking of triples, Keith, if you played today with your 60 triples career, you would have the most triples of any active player.
Really?
Yeah. Starling Marte has 55.
Who?
He has the most. Starling Marte has the most of any active player. So you have more triples than any active player.
How about that?
Yeah, so it's not just St. Louis. It's that A, you got a lot of hits, and B, when you hit a ball, you knew I'm going to bust it out of the box here, and I'm going to get to third.
I didn't run the first base and go like this to my teammates. I was running the first base, thinking that extra base all the time. Plus, AstroTurf, the ball moved through, even though today's ballparks are like putting greens. I mean, the infields are so fast. The outfields are just as fast. And I think one of the main reasons, too, is that you've gotten away. A lot of stadiums don't have the arc in the outfield from center field. They come right angle across Philadelphia and even Citi Field and Citi Field. So you lose that bend and the gaps. Oh, my God. They're afraid to put the numbers up on the gaps because, I always look in terms of Wrigley Field. Wrigley Field in the gap was 368 So when I see a 358 in the gap, I'm going, oh my God, I hit line drives, they go out. They go out instead of being off the wall or one hop the wall. And these guys are all, I mean, we're a generation and a half away from when I played. I'm 6 feet tall. I played at 6 feet tall. I haven't shrunk yet. They're all 6'5", 6'6". They're big monster behemoths, and the fences they brought in. And I do think the ball carries a little better too.
I think so. So, Keith, you played 2014 games at first base in your career, and you played 7 games in the outfield.
Yes.
Do you remember those? Why would they take the best defensive first baseman of all time and play you in the outfield even for 1 inning? Do you remember one of those games?
Yes, I do. I remember playing left field in Bush. Whitey was crazy. When he came over, he was going to move Ted Simmons in the offseason. He came over. He was going to move Ted Simmons to first base and
put you in the
outfield. And I said, okay, I'll do it. But Ted Simmons said, sure. And then Ted Simmons balked at it. And then he traded him, if you recall, a big trade to Milwaukee. He traded Fingers. He traded for Fingers. He traded for Suter. This was the offseason of 81 after the split season when we finished in second. Had the best overall record, finished second in the first and second half. So we didn't go to the playoff when we had the best record overall that year in 81. Whitey was furious. So he wouldn't make the trade in the offseason. And then he traded Vukovic. He traded a pennant to Milwaukee. And we got LaPointe out of it, which was the best part of that deal. LaPointe was a good pitcher. But he played me in left field once against Montreal. And I remember I had a great arm. I had a very good arm. And I was more impressed. Carter hit a line drive to left center field, and I was in left, and I wouldn't caught it. I ran, caught it, backhanded it. I did have one play against the wall. Luis Melendez was playing center. And I went back to the wall, and Bush had the padding on the wall all the way up, and around a foot was concrete at the top. So I went to jump, and I hit my shoulder into the padding, and it just squashed me. I couldn't jump. I could have caught it if I'd have jumped earlier, but I had no experience. I remember Luis said, you gotta put your hand out. I go, Luis, I've never played the outfield. Come on. Break. I had one play where I had to throw home, and I knew I always hit the cutoff man, and I threw it was a base hit, and the runner was scoring, and I threw a bullet home right to Obergefell, and he cut it off, and I went, darn, it would have been a one-hop. It was right accurate. Cincinnati, I was playing right field. I don't know why. Maybe George was hurt, Hendrick. I'm not sure. And base hit to right field, and I threw the runner on first. I threw to third base, and it was a one hop to the third baseman. It was just a little 5 feet up the line towards the outfield, and he was safe, sliding. But I remember one thing. I remember the turf at Riverfront, and when I got the ball on the ground, I went to throw, and my step with my front foot, my right foot, it was like, instead of pointing at my throat, it was here. It didn't move because it was the turf. And I went, oh, I'm going to blow my knee. And I didn't. So now I knew why outfielders wore the rubber nubs out in the outfield, not the cleats on the turf. I never would have realized that. So it was kind of interesting. You live and learn, right? Learn.
Absolutely.
So you've never thrown me out there.
Keith, one question we love asking any guests on the show is, like, who did you grow up watching? Who was your guy? Like Willie Mays, obviously, in that time as a kid, or were you also a Willie McCovey kid because you're a first baseman? Was that your guy?
I was a big Jim Ray Hart fan.
Wow. Number 43, yeah.
Dad liked him, and he was a tough right-hand hitter, big, stocky, line drive hitter, high ball hitter. I liked him. If I'm looking at first basemen, my dad would take. We didn't go that many games. We didn't have the money to go, but when we went, it was always the Cardinals because of Stan Musial. When my dad were friendly from the war, World War II, serving in the Navy together. Wow. Stan would leave us tickets. So Dad would have us watch the first baseman, and when it was the Cardinals, was watch Bill White. He would just say, "Okay, this whole inning, I just want you to watch Bill White and watch him and watch his footwork around the bat. Focus on that for an inning. Just look at him and see what he does with his footwork." Wes Parker, of course, never got the American League. Never came. It was so Vic Power was with Cleveland over in the American League. Never saw him play, but was very much aware of him. But back in those days, there wasn't a lot of great fielding first basemen.
Mm-hmm.
There was Lee May was at first base for the Reds. Dr. Strangeglove was at the Pirates.
Dick Stewart, right? That's so great. So Keith, back to Stan Musial for a minute. You may or may not know this. One year, he had more triples than strikeouts. 20-18. 20-18 in an era that we play in now. Guys strike out 18 times in a week. He struck out 18 times in a season and had 20 triples. I mean, something like, you talk about unbreakable records or whatever. No one's ever going to do anything like that again.
1956. Stan.
Wow, look at that card.
Here, look what he hit. Only 309, 56, but he had 100 RBI. Let's see. He had 6 triples, 33 doubles, 27 home runs, 109 ribbies, 75 walks, only struck out in 594 at-bats, 39 times, on base 386, slug 522, hit 310. 310 for him was not good. And they have him at first base, a 3, right field a 3, left field a 3, 1-11 running. He's getting a little older because he could fly. He was never a 1 for 11.
Right.
He was 117 in his prime.
Keith is looking like he's about to make a call, and just his voice Strat-O-Matic for a second.
So Keith, when you were the Cardinals' first baseman, and a great one, you must have said to yourself time and time again, "I'm playing the same position that Stan Musial played here in St. Louis at least half of the time." Did that enter your mind that one of my dad's friends, one of the greatest hitters of all time, I'm playing the same position in the same town?
Certainly did. I mean, I grew up a Cardinal fan because Stan left his tickets at Candlestick. And I remember we were old enough. It was when Solly Hemus was the manager before Johnny Keane came in. Stan's last year was 63, and they won in 64. Stan never played in the Busch Stadium I played in. He played in Old Sportsman's Park.
Right.
And I remember going into the clubhouse on getaway day in I forget, it was 62, 63, doesn't really matter. And they're all getting dressed, and Stan's there with his towel. He's already showered, and Dad was talking to Dad, and I sat down on the stool next to him like an idiot. I'm taking someone's locker. I'm like 8 years old, and Ken Boyer came and sat. His locker was to my right. And I looked over, I knew who Ken Boyer was, and he rustled my hair like this and had a big smile. I got a big kick out of that. And little did I know that I would be a Cardinal. I would play in the minor leagues for Ken Boyer. I would play in the big leagues for Ken Boyer. And I remember whenever I go into Candlestick Park and play, I would look to that locker where Musial was and where I sat and where Boyer's locker was. And they never lockered me there. But I always had I had to look when the first day of the game. I could look. How many years? I figure that was 62. So really 15 years.
Yeah.
No, 15 years ago, I was sitting in that stool next to Boyer and Stan the Man.
That's incredible. So Keith, when you went to the Cardinals, you're first off, I keep the greatest players of all time from each number. I just stop at 55. It's easier that way. I call it from Ozzie to Oral. Ozzie Smith 1, Oral Hershiser 55. You are the greatest 37 because of your 10 years in St. Louis. I'm just curious, I should know this. How did you arrive at number 37? It's an unusual number for a baseball player.
Mickey Mantle. I got my first Mickey Mantle card when I was 5 years old. Dad would come home from the fire department, and he'd bring around, these were 5 cents a pack, remember?
Right.
And I'm older than you. It might be more.
3 years older, yes.
And,
but I'm in the same area. Bubblegum cards, worst bubblegum.
Worst bubblegum.
Tastes like cardboard, but it was the package of cards were great.
It was flat and the taste was flat. So I got my first Mickey Mantle card when I was around 6. So what do? I flip around the back and from Oklahoma. October 20th. It's my birthday.
Gook.
So we share the birthday. I actually share a birthday with Juan Marichal too. And so I was a Mickey Mantle fan, and I always had a 7 on my back in the big leagues. Now, when I got called up as a rookie, Butch Yakiman, the old clubhouse guy from back, he was getting senile, and he was an old crusty guy, and he was there when he was one of the clubhouse kids when Rogers Hornsby was playing in the 20s. So he had gone through the Gas House gang as a clubhouse guy, the Musial era, the Brock and Gibson era. He had been there, and we were the new ones, and he was like 80-something years old. And he gave me 18 when I got called up in 74 from Tulsa. Late August, lost my rookie status. And when I wasn't going to complain. 8 is my one number. I don't like even numbers, and I don't like 8. But I put it on. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to go to Butch and say, "Hey, I don't like this number." So I couldn't wait for the next year, and it was 75. Well, Reggie Smith is 7. I'm not going to say, "Reggie, could I have your number?" 27 was Mike Anderson, who was our 4th outfielder, veteran. Not going to. 47, which I didn't want, was Lynn McLaughlin, our right-hand pitcher, veteran. 17 was Dizzy Dean, retired.
Right.
So the only thing left was 37. That's why I took it. So I always had a 7. When I went to St. Louis and traded to St. Louis, Charlie Samuels, our clubhouse guy, goes, "Keith, I can't give you your number, 37. And I said, "Well, why?" And he goes, "That's Casey Stengel."
Stengel's number. It's retired.
I didn't really care for that number. I go, "What do you got with a 7?" He goes, "Well, that's 17. I go, "Perfect."
Oh, that is great. So, Keith, you hit 162 homers in your career, which I thought was kind of cool because they play 162 games.
Yes.
It's a big number in baseball, and you hit 162 homers, and you never hit 20 in a season.
18.
Right. So I'm going to tell you something that even you don't know. Ron Fairley is the all-time home run leader without a 20-homer season. He hit 215, but never hit 20 in a season. And I was wondering if you were like maybe second on that list, but I found a bunch of other guys, Tim Raines, Bill Madlock, who hit more home runs than you, but fewer than
20.
Ron Fairley. So you were not a home run hitter, but you could hit the ball out of the ballpark when you wanted to. I just thought that was kind of cool. It's hard to hit 215 homers without hitting 20 in a season.
I agree. And I think if I had played in other ballparks, I would have probably hit 200. And also you've got strike years that hurt. But in St. Louis, and you remember that old ballpark, it was Old Bush Stadium. It was one street level, one floor below street level.
Right.
And it was a coliseum, and the only open area in that ballpark was from left center field to right center field, and it was above the fence, and it was open air where the wind could blow in. And when the summer came in and the humidity in July, sometimes June, it was the second biggest ballpark in the National League. Houston Astrodome was the biggest. And it was AstroTurf. You had to hit line drives there, and I was always taught to hit the top half of the ball, stay on top, almost to a fault. When I went to Shea was fair. You had to hit it there, and I got more experienced. I learned how to get a pitch up. And I was sometimes just so stubborn. I just think when your dad is. The minute I swung up in batting practice when we were kids, Gary and I, he'd go, uppercut, swing down, swing down. You'll think you're swinging down, but you're swinging level, top half of the ball. No fly balls in BP. And it was just so ingrained in me. I had pitches I could have hit out, but I had, particularly with the Mets, I had Strawberry, Carter, George Foster, McReynolds hitting behind me. And my dad always taught us that, today it's different. You got the DH now, but the two most prestigious positions in the batting order were 3 and 4. 4 was your home run hitter, your power cleanup hitter, your Harmon Killebrew, your Willie Stargell, and 3 was your Tony Oliva, Tony Gwynn. I'm not going to put Tony in there. Tony was really a better leadoff second place hitter.
Right.
He wasn't a great clutch hitter. He was a great hitter. He wasn't a bad clutch hitter. But your third, my dad always said, third hitter is the best hitter in the lineup. He's a 300 hitter. He gets on base, he walks, and he also hits 300, and he's a clutch hitter. And he sets up for the 4, 5, 6. So that was me, and that was perfect, that lineup in New York for me. And I could have lifted more. When I hit the 18 home runs, I tried to hit 20 that year. And what did I do? My average went. And I really feel, I hit well in the clutch, very well in the clutch. I think if I'd had a little more of an uppercut, less disciplined, I wouldn't have been that clutch hitter. And I wouldn't have hit 300.
Right. Keith, before we get to the Mets, Jeff, have you noticed what T-shirt Keith Hernandez is wearing? And don't tell me you haven't noticed.
Oh, I noticed very quickly. I was going to see if you were going to bring it up.
All right, now, Keith, Bullwinkle is the greatest cartoon in the history of cartoons. I will argue this point. Bullwinkle himself is the funniest cartoon character ever. And I talked my son Jeff into record, just like Strat-O-Matic at a young age. Bullwinkle is the funniest guy in the history of cartoons.
You also learn things in Bullwinkle. They had fairy tales, and it was just a great show. One of my favorites. And
Keith, being a father now, I have an 18-month-old daughter, right? And I'm already starting to feel like I'm turning into my lovingly stupid dad, because instead of teaching me things like the ABCs and stuff, he would teach me to go to my mom, pretend to hit myself in the head, and say, "First day on the job, and I already got a raise."
I recommend for your daughter or son?
It's baby girl, McKinley.
When she gets old enough, get the whole set of Bullwinkle, because it's also educational, and it's not violent, and it's funny. It is the greatest cartoon ever. Nothing comes close to it. Nothing.
I totally agree. And Keith, not to change the subject, but Get Smart is my favorite sitcom of all time. All right. And my favorite cartoon is Bullwinkle. And a guy named Chris Hayward was a writer for Get Smart and for Bullwinkle. I always regret that I never got to meet Chris Hayward, because his sense of humor was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, because Bullwinkle was hysterically funny.
My favorite was when Don Adams was with Jaime in the closet and the light was on, and he goes, "Jaime, kill the light." Stop the light.
Keith, I took Jeffrey on a trip to Cooperstown one year. It's like 6 hours in the car. I bring all of my Get Smart tapes. I got every one of them. And we had a TV in the back of the car, because he's 11 years old. He's not going to sit up front with me and me tell him baseball stories. So he watched every episode of Get Smart on the way up and the way back. So he doesn't know it like I do, but...
My favorite,
Kill the Light is one of the great ones ever.
My favorite was Siegfried, of all the bad
guys. Bernie Koppel played Siegfried, Jeff. Then he played in The Love Boat, and Siegfried was one of the funniest characters in the history of the show. Keith, this is unbelievable. We are in the Strat-O-Matic Hall of Fame. We both love Get Smart, and we consider Bullwinkle the greatest cartoon of all time. Oh my gosh. You got to be worried you're this hooked to me, Keith, because I'm the weirdest man in the world. And now I find out so are you.
The world's going to hell in a handbasket.
Oh, I love it. All right. We could laugh all day, and we've kept you way too long. We have to ask a gratuitous Met question, even though it's just going to completely put a halt to this tremendously fun interview, but just tell me where the Mets are now that they've added $765 million to play the outfield.
Well, more importantly, they've added probably the best hitter in the game,
right,
in Soto. And they signed Pete. Pete was floating around for a long time, which surprised me. And I just felt that if they had if Pete had been picked up, it would have been a swap. But with Soto and Pete together, that is formidable. Now, Vientos had 27 home runs last year. He's got to do it again. He's very disciplined. I think he's going to be fine. It's a veteran team. It's a team ready to win. But unfortunately, you've lost Minaya now with an oblique. They're, it's like the soup Nazi. No more sit-ups for you. It's these obliques. They're 6 to 8 weeks. And he's out. And Madrigal evidently is kind of shoulder. He fractured his shoulder. He was going to be a utility infielder. But losing him, Montas, and there's 2 starters, and the Mets can ill afford. They're going to win or lose with their pitching. I think their bullpen is a lot better than last year. Phillies are going to be tough. They made some really good moves, and that starting rotation is really formidable. I mean, you're going to go into Philly. It's like going into, when I was young, you go into Pittsburgh and you'd have Jim Rooker, Candelaria, Ken Brett, Jerry Royce, or you go to Dodgers, it was Sutton, Valenzuela. You just don't get a break. Seaver, Kuzman, Madlack. It's like, you look ahead and you go, oh boy, have I got my work cut out. So that's what it's going to be like for Philly. I mean, when you're going to play the Phillies. But that's why they play the games. I think they're going to be there in the end. But, the injuries are scary. You just don't know how they're going to bounce back from injuries. And that when you make all the predictions you want in a season and you just can't predict injury.
Right. All right, Keith, I'll finish with one final Strat-O-Matic question. When's the last time you played a game, and will you play games like you still play?
I've been on their butt because I switched to Apple around 7-8 years ago, and they didn't have the game compatible for Mac, and now I think they've made the game compatible for a Mac. It's not the same. They got to get some kinks out of it, but you can play it. Until they get the kinks out and make it like a regular PC, I'll play again in the off season. I kind of like the fact that you can just. It's fun to roll the dice. You feel like but I don't mind pressing the button. You can hold that button down, let it roll for 15 seconds, and then let go. And you're in the corner. Or you can just do real quick.
We need to get the two of you playing against each other. That would be fun.
Oh, us?
That would me against Keith.
Oh,
that would be great. I'll finish with this.
I was going to say, Dad'll set it up by butt dialing you 3 or 4 times.
One more thing, real quick. I know we got to get on.
Yes.
I played 63 one year. The Mets were terrible.
Right.
At least the 62 Mets had hitting, and they had no hitting in 63. They took a step backwards. I couldn't win with them. They were terrible.
So, Keith, you're saying the 63 Mets were even worse than the 62 Mets, at least offensively, right?
Offensively, they were terrible. Look at that. Go back and look at their lineup.
Did you throw cards up in the air like you did with Bob Lemon? Oh, this is so good. This is so great. All right, Keith, thank you so much for joining us. We could go on for 3 more hours. I told you 15 minutes. We went 45 because we got on to Bullwinkle and Jaime. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
1940 Cincinnati. 1956 Pirates. Look at Clemente's card.
Oh,
wow.
God. What's that throwing arm there?
I love playing. The old leagues are kind of boring, especially in the 50s, especially in the American League. Oh, my God, it was just, 3-run home runs. I got guys that couldn't run, bad fielders. It was just a power league, where the National League integrated and had all that speed, and they were so much more fun to play the National League because you can do so much more. You can hit and run, you can steal, and all those great African American players that came in. It just changed the game, really.
Really did. Jeff, they used to play Aaron, Mays, and Clemente in the same outfield in the All-Star game when I was a little kid. If you don't think that didn't resonate with me then and for the rest of my life, then you don't know me, because those were the days that I said, this is what Major League Baseball is all about.
Yep, and the Reds were the first team to have an all-black outfield. Cincinnati Reds. Right. That was Frank Robinson, Vada Pinson. Vada Pinson, you can make an argument for the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Famer, yes, absolutely.
And it was Tommy Harper, I think, was the other guy.
He was.
All-black outfield in Major League Baseball.
Right. Those were the days.
Yep.
All right, Keith, thanks again so much. Jeff, thanks for getting
Keith,
us to get
great.
Keith on.
That is a sight to be seen, flashing his season cards.
Oh, look at this. I feel like I want a blackjack table in Vegas.
Keith, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much to Keith Hernandez for such an incredible interview. And we have very exciting news. This is our final off-season podcast episode, because in 2 weeks we are back kicking off the regular season, which means we're going weekly again. But, Dad, we had so much fun in 2024 that you and I, the only two members of this LLC, the only two people who work on this podcast, have decided that we are going to start doing 2 episodes a week of Is This a Great Game or What? Releasing now Tuesdays at midnight Eastern Standard Time and Friday mornings at midnight on Eastern Standard Time. Dad, this is big. I cannot wait to spend some more time with you talking baseball. This has been a dream come true for me.
Well, me too, Jeff. Have you told your wife, Emily, that we are planning on doing this? Because your workload just got a whole lot bigger with a second episode. Is she aware of this?
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I have to go tell her now. No, I'm just kidding. No, I did. And I have to give my wife a lot of credit. I was talking to her about the podcast. This is right after you and I had recorded a different off-season episode. And we were sitting in bed. We were talking about it. And I said, I feel like this is really our year to like pedal to the metal with Is This a Great Game or What? And she said, have you ever thought about doing it twice a week?
Wow.
And I kind of said, yeah, I was kind of kicking that around. I know, Dad, you had been kicking it around, and respectfully, you had always said to me, Jeff, this is going to be more work for me because I'm the one doing the editing and all of that stuff. And I said, I'm in. And my wife was the idea. It was her idea. And you and I are ready to go. So on March the 18th, it will be our first episode back for the regular season. And then that means on March the 21st, that Friday, will be our second. We're going to be doing 2 a week. Tuesday mornings at midnight, you can get it, and Friday mornings at midnight. It's a big undertaking, Dad, but I wouldn't want to do this with anybody else. This has been the highlight of my personal and professional career to be able to do this with you.
Well, mine too, Jeff. I can't wait. So let's get going. March the 18th, 2 a week.
Thanks for listening. And as always, thank you for being a part of our family.